Welcome to 365 Brothers, the podcast. I'm your host, Robin Shine. I am delighted to bring to you brothers from across the United States and from various professions talking about their life experiences, their wisdom, and a conversation that also touches on racial profiling in the United States, how pervasive it is, what the impact is. And remember, you can follow us on Instagram at 365 Brothers. Also, follow us on Facebook at 365 Brothers, the podcast. If this is your first time listening to a 365 Brothers episode, make sure you subscribe because you do not want to miss one brother's wisdom, one brother's experience, and their perspective on life in the United States. This brother is originally from Dallas, Texas. He currently resides in Eastvale, California, and he is all about investing in business. And I'm excited to have this venture capitalist to share with us about his life and venture capitalism. I have a feeling by the end of the show, you'll know a little bit more than you knew before. We're speaking today with Taj A. Eldridge. Welcome, Taj.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to hear and speak to your audience and to talk about the things that we do.
I am equally excited. New listeners, welcome. Old listeners, yeah, you know I'm about to say, and I teach economics at high school, but I love sharing with my students about the opportunity to own businesses because so often we look at education like get a job, get a job, get a job, and our society is really, if it weren't for businesses, there'd be nothing to buy. And, you can argue about consumerism or not, but the thing is businesses make the world go round. So I'm very excited to talk to a brother who's in the business of business.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
I typically say what I do is being an economic artist, because I think that what we try to do is we try to, for me, it's about ownership and it's about future planning, right? Because I think that whether or not you're entrepreneur, or even if you work at a company, you're an entrepreneur. And so for me, it's all about creating opportunities where ownership is abound and we can close this racial wealth gap that we have.
Fantastic. Yeah, I'm all about that. One thing you said, whether you're an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur, and, I've done some reading. I know what an entrepreneur is, but could you share what it is for our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at the term like entrepreneur, those are individuals who are starting their own business, taking a lot of risk, but at the end of the day, they're creating something. So if you ever heard of the story of Cheetos, of Red Hot Cheetos that was created by an entrepreneur who was actually a janitor at Frito-Lay and created that opportunity and was paid handsomely for that as well. Absolutely. When you look at a product like the Sony PS5, that was created by an employee who had nothing to do with engineering, who actually took a Nintendo home to his child and figure out a way that his employer, Sony, can get into that business of video gaming. So I think there's a fallacy that says if you're not working for yourself, you're not living. And I think that's the thing we have to get out of. The whole idea for us is that you want to be in a space where you can create, and you can create either if you own your own business or even if you're an entrepreneur. So
I want to distinguish this actually for myself because when I think of an entrepreneur, I think of someone who is, who's creating something new, like you said, or participating in that process. Now, are these people like the janitor who came up with this hot Cheetos? Did he get some money?
Oh, absolutely. He got paid very handsomely. And in some cases, like the person with the video game, you share what's called the IP or intellectual property, which is basically the building blocks of whatever you created. So yeah, even as an entrepreneur, you can reap the rewards and the benefits of being a creator.
That's cool. I haven't even given you yet a chance to share a little bit about yourself. So because you just already was dropping terms that I just thought, should be explored. And I'm so glad I did, because I might not have found out about this Cheetos guy. I did not know that. Maybe other people do, but I did not. That's awesome. So before we go into the formal questions, is there anything, Taj, that you'd like to share about yourself to help the listeners get to know you better?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I'm an economist as well. So shout out to all of us economists that are out there who are understanding the value of things and what makes people make decisions. But in addition to that, I used to be a rapper back in the day and in the 80s and
Out.
90s. So it'll come out. I was a poetry major and literature major in undergrad. So I always say that I think that ability to tell stories in a visual standpoint with words helped me as a venture capitalist and helped me as a founder as well. So that's one tidbit that a lot of the folks may not know, but your listeners know now.
All right. So when you say you're a rapper, anything we would know, might know?
No, I made sure all of that was wiped from the internet when I got into professionalism. But no, I grew up in Dallas, and a lot of people don't know the history of music, especially hip hop music in Dallas. I'm 46, so if you're around my age, you remember when NWA first came out. The person who wrote a majority of those lyrics was a guy named Tracy Curry, also known as the DOC. DOC was born and raised in Dallas before he came to California.
Oh, no kidding.
So Dallas has always had a history of music that's just now taken out in this recent years. But back then in the 80s and 90s where I grew up, yeah, we had a decent music industry there.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. By the way, note to listeners, did you just hear? He said he cleaned up his internet footprint. So, if you did something kind of crazy, I'm just saying. Not that rapping was crazy, but for those of you who have, it's not over. It's not over.
Shout out to reputation.com. If you don't know about reputation.com, definitely know that's one tool that you can use to make sure you have a good digital footprint.
Okay. Let's jump in. What is a favorite song or movie, either now or all time?
So I'm going to go with movie first. So I was born on Valentine's Day. So I am definitely a hopeless romantic. And so for me, seeing all this melanin on the skin for Love Jones, that is one of my favorite movies ever. Also because I was a poetry major, like I mentioned, I wrote poetry. So for me, that was a fantastic movie and a film. And then the favorite song, even though I'm a 90s baby and I'm all about New Jack Swing and 90s R&B, I definitely have to say one of my favorite songs is Sam Cooke, A Change Is Gonna Come. I think that has resonated through the time and space for our people.
Oh, that's a great song. And listeners, if you don't know, if you're new, there will be a link in the show notes so you can just go straight to it. You don't even have to look it up. I love that song so much, so much. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. What's a favorite childhood memory?
Yeah, so, I grew up in Texas, like I mentioned, in Dallas, North Texas. And I think back then and in the 80s, 70s and 80s, that it was a simpler time where, you would literally put a bucket outside and catch your ice to make ice cream. So for me, that's definitely a memory, pre climate change where we have like 0 degree weather right now and then 80 degrees the next day. So that is a one memory of mine, and plus my dog, which you probably just heard one of the others, but playing with my dog when I was younger, that is a great childhood memory. That anytime I see snow, especially now that I'm in Southern California, it makes me think back to my childhood.
What was your dog's name?
So it's funny. When I was growing up, I had an Afghan hound whose name was Domino, and really, really enjoyed that pet. But as I got older, I became more of a cat person. And so I have a family of 3 and a wife. And so every member of my family has a dog except for me. I have a cat. And my cat name is Pumpkin Spice One. For those who know hip hop and old school hip hop, they'll get that reference. But yes, his name is Pumpkin Spice One.
Oh, come on. Don't cheat us. I don't know the reference. Tell me, what is it?
There's a rapper named Spice One who's from the Bay Area.
Okay, that's cute. Pumpkin Spice One. I love it. Awesome. Let's talk about accomplishments. And I asked this question in 2 parts. First, which accomplishment is the one that means the most to you personally? And then which accomplishment is the one where others go, wow, or So let's start with the first. Which accomplishment means the most to you personally, Taj?
I've been married for 20 plus years. My wife and I have 3 beautiful children. And, as I mentioned, I wanted to be a rapper, but my parents were like, "You're going to go to college?" So I said, I'm going to major in poetry and literature. And I think for me, that sense of wanting to be an artist was always in me, but I knew that I needed to make money. And so I got into finance, got into banking. So when I had my own children, I wanted to be able for them to not have to make the decisions I made. And even though I enjoy what I'm doing, I wanted my children to really explore the art side. So I'm most proud of all 3 of my children are artists. One is in art school now, being an animator. One is a musician that plays 7 different types of instruments. And my youngest is a painter who just has some fantastic, beautiful paintings all over the home. So I am very personally proud that the fact that my wife and I raised 3 beautiful artists who are not starving artists.
I truly was just thinking about this today, about the privilege of extra income, of being comfortable. And it doesn't necessarily mean rich or anything like that, but just having enough extra, enough that you're not concerned about surviving, because it's only when you're not concerned about surviving that you can really pour into your art. Now, I know there's starving artists and you can do it, but I mean, there's something about overall the freedom to not have to struggle that gives you access to, a little. Maybe I'm biased. People can tell me, but I think it does allow for greater self-expression. I know that's true in my life.
Yeah.
When I'm struggling, It's harder to be creative.
Yeah. I think you just create different type of art when you're struggling. And I think, history has taught us that there have been artists who have been supported financially from donors and benefactors. And I think the art that they've created has been great. And then there are artists who have not been supported. And if I get off on a tangent, I think of artists like Eldridge, who's a writer who was married once to Sonia Sanchez, the poet. And he was in bondage in jail and what have you, but made some of the greatest poetry ever. Then versus people like Jack Kerouac and others who are a little bit more well off. But to your second question about accomplishment, if that's my personal accomplishment, the one I think that most people often talk about is really twofold. Number one, I mentioned I'm in Eastville, which is in Riverside County, California, which is a county adjacent to Los Angeles. It's heavily Latino and African American. And we were able to make this county the number 4 place in the nation by Entrepreneur magazine for diverse founders. And so I'm pretty proud that we were on par with San Jose, Houston, and Atlanta, and really being a place for people to grow. We beat out San Francisco, we beat out Los Angeles. And so that's an accomplishment I hear often. And then another really quickly is we, in the business that I'm in, and we'll go into it later, we raise money from investors and then take that money to invest in companies. And my partners and I, we just raised $250 million for a fund to invest in other venture funds. So, that's no small feat. It's not a small number, but we're pretty proud that we're in the process of launching that and moving forward with it.
So you've raised the funds, and so you guys, your company will be able to then pour that money into businesses that you believe have potential to grow.
Well, actually, no. We're what's called a fund of funds, which means that we will pour that money or invest into other venture funds who will then invest in those companies. So it's a little bit interesting because a lot of people always ask, well, if a VC invests in a startup company, what does the VC get their money from? And the VC get their money from funds like us or other pension funds and everything else. And so the reason why we decided to be a fund of funds is that we wanted to see more people like us control the money as opposed to just ask for the money. And so that's the reason that we decided to be a fund of funds. And the reason the way we're doing it is we're only investing in Black and brown fund managers. So that's the way we're impacting that.
First of all, I just got an education because, I knew that venture capitalist companies were companies, but for some reason, I actually thought that they tapped into their own resources, not like their personal checking accounts, but that you had groups of people who pull, vast resources together and that's how those things got funded. What I didn't realize and just learned is that they're actually tapping a pool of resources.
Yeah. In the investment world, there's really two types of investors. If you just look at it from a very high level standpoint, there are angels, which like you mentioned, they use their own capital, they use their own money and make investments, and so those are angel investors. And typically, those are like the first batch of money that goes into founders to help them
Mm-hmm.
out. And
Mm-hmm.
then you have what we call institutional grade investors, which are venture funds. And the reason why they're institutional is because they take money from others, and they are professional money managers or professional investors. And the way they get paid is that they take typically 2% of the total amount that they raise. So if you have, let's say, $100 million, you take a 2% of that as your fee. And then whatever returns or whatever investment that they make, meaning that whatever, if they have a return of a certain amount, they get typically 20% of that as a return. So you may
Fantastic.
hear in our industry is 2 and 20, but that's how venture funds are typically paid out and how they make money.
Wow. I
Yeah.
appreciate you expanding on that. That was really cool to know.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people will be surprised. I know people may not think they're interested in finance per se at that level, but I think once you hear it, it is intriguing.
Yeah. We all should know about it, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about words. What's your favorite quote, saying, metaphor, or book, and why?
I was thinking about that because, it's funny, as a lover of words, there are so many quotes that I love.
No
And
doubt.
so I have to give at least two because there are so many, but these are quotes that I not only say to myself, but I live by as well. So one is one I heard when I was younger and in college, and it's find a way or make one. Find a way or make one. And I tell my children all the time, meaning that if a barrier comes, I'm not going to stop. I'm going to find a way or make one. So that's number one. Number two, which I think that I kind of live by in what I do, is the phrase that talent is universal, but opportunity is not. And I always try to ensure that I'm part of the team that's making that change to where opportunity can match the talent. And then I have to add one more in
Go
threes.
ahead. Go ahead.
One additional one, because I'm a lover of words. One additional one, and some of your listeners may know where this comes from, is a generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. So that's something I always try to live by and try to always be a giver more than a taker.
Yeah, I love all of those. I especially love the second one. Can you say it one more time?
Yeah, the talent is universal, but opportunity is not. Essentially what that means is that, in my industry, everybody thinks San Francisco is the end all be all, that all of the innovation comes from San Francisco, and thus a lot of the opportunity is there. But what we're saying is that there's opportunity all over. There's talent all over, and we just need to match that with the opportunity, meaning that we need to have capital going to places like Alabama, Mississippi, New Orleans, Dallas, Wisconsin, Missouri, where you may have talented people and great ideas, but not a lot of capital to move those ideas forward.
And the reason I love that so much, as an educator who's at an alternative high school, I see kids that, others may not, they haven't excelled in school. Some of them have, but, something happened, they got behind. But in either case, each of them are stars, and it's just a matter of finding out where they're a star. And so for me, it touched me very personally, as you said that, as I think about these kids who, may not get an opportunity to shine because, they've got to help the parents put food on the table so they get a job right out of high school and maybe don't go back to college for who knows how long.
Mm.
And so anyway, yeah, I love that. Where's that from?
I think it's attributed to a person in my industry named Mitch Kapoor, who's an investor in San Francisco. And he's been really kind of focusing on diverse investments and investing in people of color for years. So definitely, I attribute it to him.
Fantastic.
The third one, of course, is a Bible verse from Proverbs
Yes.
11:25. And
Yes.
then the first one I actually got from Benjamin E. Mays, who's an educator.
All right. Well, thank you. I will, of course, list them in the show notes. So let's talk about some experiences. Is there a person, conversation, moment, or event that stands out as either changing the trajectory of your life or had a significant impact on your life?
I ended up being a member of Kappa Alpha Psi. And I think both being in that fraternity and being in venture capital, I could attribute it to a person by the name of Reginald F. Lewis. Reginald F. Lewis was one of the first Black billionaires in the United States, who was a lawyer, a Harvard-trained lawyer, also a member of Kappa Alpha Psi, who purchased several different companies in private equity. And that was my first time even learning about the phrase venture capital and private equity. I had no idea what it was prior. Unfortunately, he passed away when I was in high school in 1993. He died from a brain tumor. So I never got a chance to thank him. I never got a chance to meet him. But definitely he is one person that changed my life and changed what I knew I could be. Because before then, I never really saw anybody who looked like me in private equity or even know what it was. But his success was something that made me think that I can do it as well.
Well, I appreciate you mentioning that, because to start off as a literature major, I mean, you graduated with a degree in poetry and literature, yes?
That's correct. And ironically, the way I found Reginald F. Lewis was through a book. He had an autobiography that was appropriately called "Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun?" The title alone made me want to read it. Read it in one sitting. And after reading it, I knew what I wanted to be after that.
What? I don't hear that often. Yeah. I mean, so I get the impact he had in that, being aware of him had you, one, admire him, and then also to read his book. But then truly, like the reading of that story, that book, Why Should White Men Have All the Fun? That had you go into venture capitalism.
Yeah, because I never knew about, and it's funny, we were talking about this, at least when I was in school, finance was never really taught. We never really had an exposure to it. I grew up in a working class neighborhood and community. So for us, it was about the pathway to ownership and wealth was sports or music. So I thought music was the pathway. And I've seen other people who excelled in music. And again, he was the first person that I've seen. And rightly, there have been others in finance prior, but his success was so meteoric. And the fact that he wrote a book about it, again, as a literature major, I'm picking up books and reading it. That I think that influenced me.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. The title alone is intriguing because I kind of want to read it just because of that.
Yeah. And I could guarantee you, if you meet anybody else who's a member of Kappa Alpha Psi, they've most likely read the book.
Okay, so he's legend in that fraternity.
In the fraternity and in the industry, to be honest with you. Yeah, definitely.
Right. Wow. I will tell you, one of the things that is standing out for me as I interview you is the person I interviewed yesterday is an Omega. And it stands out because that was his image for when we went off camera on Zoom. I was like, seriously? And I'm not Greek. I did not pledge. One of the things I'm noticing as a theme is that a lot of the brothers that I'm talking to, they were either in the military or in a fraternity. What strikes me, what I'm now curious about, is the role of having a tribe.
Yeah. If I may, I definitely think that way. And for me, like I mentioned, I grew up in Dallas, and for those who are not really familiar with the South, there's a show that came out years ago called Banging in Little Rock, and what they talked about was the gang culture in the South was just as strong, if not stronger, than in the West. And it was the same way in Dallas. So a lot of my relatives, a lot of my cousins were in gangs, and they were Bloods. And so when I went to college, I'll be very honest, it was an easy transition to go to a fraternity and a tribe that was like that. Because I think a lot of times, too, we look at gangs and we look at all the negative things about it. But I think the reason that my cousins joined and even that I joined a fraternity, it was about brotherhood. And it was about belonging. And it was about really kind of being in a family of equals. And I think similar to how gangs are, most people who are in gangs are, it's forever and they kind of stay into it. And, in some instances, it's the same thing with fraternities. You have people who go to college in fraternities, and I bet I've been out of school for 20 plus years and I'm still, definitely repping my fraternity anytime I get a chance. So I think it's really interesting, and I think there should be some psychological studies on that. But definitely, I do feel a sense of belonging when I'm with my brothers, and I can tell you what I love about it is that I could travel to anywhere in the world, and I meet somebody who is in my fraternity, and I have a friend in that part of the world, and I think it says something about that makes us want to love it and be dedicated to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll even say one of the things I also recall is how often the brothers I've interviewed, some of their favorite childhood memories are memories with their, I'm going to say crew in short, but, and so now I'm personally, I'm now very curious about how. So my undergrad major was sociology, so you can probably hear that. I'm like, so what is the role of group belonging in creating a foundation for the confidence for success and access to success? So anyway, just a little side tangent that I'm now very curious about, and will probably be all up on Google after we get done. So, what's a moment or event that either highlights or kind of signifies your experience as a Black man in the United States?
I thought about this a lot, and wow, with George Floyd and Trayvon Martin and all the other Sandra Bland and all these other experiences, I'll never forget. I was for those who know Greek life and know Kappas, our claim to fame is dressing very dapper. I was wearing a suit, and I remember it was my sophomore year in college, and I was with some of my fraternity brothers. One of my fraternity brothers, one guy, and another guy was a member of Alpha Phi Alpha. We were home for college. This was probably 1994, and we went to these young ladies' house, and these police came out and demanded the three guys who just came here come out, and they had guns to our heads and made us get into the grass, and it was crazy because we just didn't know what was going. They didn't identify themselves. They were not in like police uniforms until the other crew came in, and we were asking what was going on, and they had us in the grass, and ants were all over us, and it was just an insane experience. And literally about 20 minutes later, they let us go. And they're like, oh, we caught the people. Somebody had evidently robbed a Sonic Burger or some type of fast food spot. And all the description they had was 3 Black males. And so they pulled us over and got us out because somebody said 3 Black males came into a house. And I'll be honest, that experience, the three of us, I became a venture capitalist. One of the guys became a lawyer. The other guy became a preacher who has since passed away. But we never talked about it. We ended up meeting again, seeing each other again on Facebook, and we mentioned it once. So we all talked about how that experience changed us forever. And I know for me, it made me never want to go back to Texas. And I think for my other friends, it made him want to be a lawyer. And then the other guy, I definitely think it's the reason that he became a preacher, because that experience was insane. And I think when we talk about what that experience as a Black man, I think for me, it shows that there's an experience that we have that others don't. And that's reality. It's funny when my colleagues, my white colleagues in my work, when this George Floyd situation happened, it was almost like they just now saw what we have known for years. And it was a bit of trauma reliving that. And now I'm able to talk about it, but I think I was preparing myself to even mention it as we were going through this, because I was just like, man, this is 20 plus years later, I still can feel it.
Yeah. I think that's for certain, that's part of the reason for the podcast, is because what I did know was that Black men were stopped more often than others, more than Black women, more than other races, and that in tragic incidences, it can lead to an unnecessary death. But what I've learned is how often the guns are drawn, how many, this is all people by referral. So I can't claim that it's any kind of study, but what I can say is that it's a higher percentage than I anticipated of young Black men who in their youth had a gun on them that was from the state. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of people miss that part because it's not just that someone had a gun on you, it's that these are supposed to represent safety.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely. I mean, the phrase protect and serve, I stopped believing in that a long time ago. And it's unfortunate, and I think that someone would ask, well, that one experience, got you that way. And I think about, it's not just my experience, but others. And what was interesting is that even when we had this conversation around the time of George Floyd in my office and my work, a good amount of the African-American males all had some type of experience that was negative. And it was to the point to where the people just couldn't believe it. So yeah, and it's funny. The next question is about law enforcement. I think as time went on, I have relatives in my family that are in law enforcement, and I definitely don't look at it anyway. But even the community I live in is a huge community where we have a lot of law enforcement and law officers that live here, sheriffs and everything else. But to this day, I don't want to own a gun. I don't. I think that also impacted me from that standpoint too, where I don't even want to see that.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us. And as you said, the next question is about interactions with law enforcement. Obviously you've shared one already. Is there anything else that you can?
Yeah.
Please.
And like I said, I think as I got older, some of my friends ended up being in law enforcement and some relatives and what have you. So I think even how I train my children how to deal with law enforcement, and it's definitely a lot of situations to where when you're in trouble, the first person you call is that. But I look at it differently from a standpoint of just making sure I tell my son who's taller than me, I just want him to come back home. And it's interesting. There's a movie that just came out called American Skin. I think if the audience has ever seen it, I definitely think a lot what the father told his son is the same thing I tell my son, that yes, you have rights, but you have to act a certain way just so you can survive.
Yeah. New listeners, this will be new for you, but I highly recommend a video on YouTube entitled 10 Rules for Dealing with the Police. You want the 38-minute one, and it is perfect for showing young people so that they both know their rights, but at the same time, know how to communicate their knowledge of the rights. You don't want to get out of hand. So kind of in answer to that question, you were sharing that how you have prepared your children. Anything else you want to say about law enforcement, your experiences?
I hope it gets better when we have situations like January 6th, when you see how a certain group is treated versus others. It makes you think. But I am very hopeful. One of my hopes is that the law enforcement, if you get a doctorate degree, you have 7 years to get the training to be, considered a person who has a doctorate degree in economics and anything else. In many other countries, the training for being a police officer is laborious and very lengthy. Here in the United States, it's a couple of weeks. My hope is that we take this opportunity as a nation and make some changes in that. And I think training is definitely needed. So I'm hoping that the future calls something a little bit better.
Wow. I never wondered what the training was like outside of the United States. That's something quite intriguing. I do know how short ours is, and that the requirements are. I know it varies from state to state and local police to local police, but they're not very stringent. I don't think you have to have any college or anything like that. Not that that makes you necessarily a good person, but given that the training is so short, yeah, that's interesting that they train longer. Cool.
Yeah.
If the United States was a woman with whom you could speak,
Mhm.
what would you say to her, whether she's mother, lover, stranger, child, neighbor, whatever?
A good question. I like personification. I would tell her I love her because I think even and a love from a standpoint of son to mother. Because if you've ever been a son, and you had a good mother, she may have chastised you, put you into place. May have even, if you're from the old school South, got a little tap on your hand or your backside. But there's no doubt in your mind that you love her and she loves you. I think for the United States, as African Americans, we have a interesting relationship because of how we've been treated. But we have to be very, very understanding of the privilege that we do have compared to others in the Black diaspora. That's another thing I always kind of think about. I tell my children that as well, is that, the reality of it is that we have an institution or a space where even though there's racism, even though there's discrimination, my children live in a house that they're blessed with, that they have a lot of the privileges that others have. And there are many others who look like this as well. And even though there are a lot of our people who are not, we have that opportunity. So I think that's one of the things I would say is that, yeah, I do love you, because it is sometimes can be a love-hate relationship with the experiences in the country. But I do think, we do have some advantages that others may not have. When I look at my cousins who are, in Sudan or in Dominican Republic, who don't have access to certain things that we do, so definitely that's what I would say.
Everything that you just said inspired me to, because I ditto on everything you said about it being a very complicated relationship, because, when you think about the enslavement and all of that, there's a tendency to want to be like, ugh, this place. But at the same time, like, I got generations that go back here. I'm 100% American. I don't, I could live as if I don't belong, but why would I live that way just because some small percentage or large percentage, but whatever percentage of people out there have not embraced it? That's not my problem.
Yeah.
This is, this is where my peoples are now from. And I could go back, but it's, this is that. And then the other thing is, doubling down on what you said about the opportunities here. I'll tell you, the thing that did it for me was after 9/11, when we went to war in Afghanistan. And that was when all of a sudden the word burqa was a commonly understood term. I didn't really know that term before. And for those of you who may be, young enough to not have been there for that, but burqa, there was a lot of talk about how the women were subjugated and had so few rights and had to cover burqa as a face covering. And so, in addition to their hair. And so anyway, I remember listening to some different stories about it, and I was driving home. It was a 710 freeway. At that point, my work was downtown Long Beach. I'm on the 710 freeway, stuck in traffic, and I suddenly look around and realize how much freedom I have. Like, to own a car, like I'm not in Saudi Arabia where you can't even, they just recently let women drive if they have a brother in the car, And I just was so present to this freedom that I have. And, after that, it was just like, yeah, there's a lot that needs to change, but this freedom it's so beyond what so many people on the planet. I'm not saying the majority or all, but there's so many people who would dream to have this amount of freedom. And so that was as a woman, but then, ditto as a African American, as a Black person. So thank you for that. And then the last thing I'll say that you inspired was, all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, if I saw the United States as my mom, Like, I might just see her as, and I don't mean any disrespect on mental illness, but as schizophrenic, like she suffers
Yeah.
from some kind of
Yeah.
illness,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I'm
Absolutely.
not going to stop loving her, but she's got some issues, and those issues
Mhm.
have a real and lasting impact on my life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. That was very. I love that. Okay, so then let's talk about love. Taj, what is love to you?
So as I mentioned, I was born on Valentine's Day, and love is a really interesting thing for me. And if you remember, I was a poet. I love poetry. So
Oh yeah.
for my definition of love, I want to quote one of my favorite poets, Miss
Okay.
Sonia Sanchez. She spoke so eloquently about love. What she said was, "Love between us is speech and breath. Loving you is a long river running." For me, what that means is just that it's life. It's as natural as breathing. It's as natural as speaking, and with that cadence with it, and it is as calming as a long river running. So that's what love is to me.
It's nice to have a poet on. Yeah, I'm in the world of that. And, and like rivers, sometimes river can be a little dry and then it
Mm-hmm.
can flood, but it
Mm-hmm.
has changes in it, just like our experience of love in our relationships. It's, not just
Absolutely.
romantic, but even our friendships. There are moments where maybe you don't talk as much and then you're talking all the time. Yeah, that's,
Absolutely.
yeah, I love that. Well, now is when I get to ask, what is something you've learned through your profession, training, experiences, or adventures that you believe more Black men should know, but don't, knowing that whatever you say benefits all of us?
Yeah. I think this goes along with the last three questions you asked. And it's something that we're all are doing now. A group of us, we're doing it. And I think you've had other men in fraternities on it, and they said to each other, we don't tell each other, we need to, from a professional, for Black men to each other, and I'm speaking to you Black men, we need to tell each other we love each other more.
Mm.
I think that's something that's missing, that has been missing with when a lot of the different generations. My fraternity brothers and I, we make sure we say it every day to each other. We have a consortium of other men that's investors and founders, and we make sure to say it and look out for each other and begin to treat each other better. So definitely, man, I think that's what we should start with is loving each other and saying it, because once you say it, it's easier to do.
Mm-hmm. I love that that's what you share on this episode, where I suddenly discover the role of the importance of community, of tribe, really is what I mean, and male tribe, male
Mhm.
connection. But when you say that, I don't know, I just think about when I've talked to young kids who were actually in gangs, and I have an opportunity to have a candid conversation with them. And they say the same things that you hear that they say when you read some kind of report or watch a documentary, that it was like my family and they
Yeah,
took care of me and they watched over me.
yeah,
And so it just really, yeah, I mean, it just points to how important what you said is.
yeah, yeah. I think there was a break in what was already natural to us. I think that was a natural thing to us before we came here. And I think that break, we are still as a people still striving and still have that inside of us. And
Hmm.
it's came out in our sense of belonging and being in these groups, whether it's gangs, whether it's fraternities, whether it's even before then, you had organizations, before even how
Hmm.
the, organization was created, little clubs that you had back in the 1800s. So definitely.
Right. Wow. It's so funny for me because every conversation I've learned so much each time. And so because I've learned so much, then the next one comes around and I'm like, okay, well, now let's go through the questions. And then each time I'm like, wow, I learned so much. But it's what I love that this podcast has become for me anyway, and I hope for my listeners, is it's a repository of Black men's wisdom, because there's a kind of wisdom that you get from having the particular experiences that Black men have in the United States. And it just rings through in every episode. So I'm really excited. And thank
Yeah,
you for
yeah.
everything.
And these were some fantastic questions. You know, I spent a lot of time answering questions directly about business and about investing. So it was really refreshing to speak on some different things. And again, I love the questions about love, because it enabled me to tap on that end. And I say all the time that even what we do now, we make our founders that we invest in read poetry books in addition to business books, because we realize that creativity spurs innovation, and innovation spurs creativity. So we definitely make them use both sides of their brains.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I'm all down with that. Well, you've kind of already answered the question. I'm still going to ask it. So, what did you, Taj, get out of participating in this conversation for yourself personally?
Oh yeah. Well, you know, I think for me, you know, it's funny. I did two other podcasts right before this one. One was called Ellie Venture. That, again, was on business and my fund, and another one was just on technology and clean tech, which is where I invest in. And so this one was like a spades game or domino game, which for me means happiness. It means family. So it was less about work and more just about, let me just sit down and have a chat at a family reunion. So I definitely feel that this was the experience for me, and it was great. This is my last meeting of the day, so definitely this is a good way to go out.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'm so delighted. Well, what I want to say in finishing our time together is you're inspiring. And what I mean by inspiring is it's not just all that you have accomplished, though that too is inspiring. It's really that you seem to have a natural ability to spark curiosity. Like you speak in a way that kind of just has me lean in
Yeah,
and
that.
wonder. And if that comes from your study of poetry, then awesome. If it just comes from who you are in the world, awesome. Whatever it is, Taj, I just thank you for being a light of inspiration in the world.
No worries. It's fun. I'll leave it with this really, and I didn't mention it, but I think I'll be honest, I don't know if it's always been that way or what, but I think when I was younger, in my 20s and my 30s, I was on that ascension, right? My whole thing was like, let's make money, let's climb the corporate ladder. And I got sick about 2 years ago. I got kidney disease, and it's a disease that impacts primarily African Americans. It's called FSGS. It's a rare genetic disease. And by the time they discovered it, I was stage 5, which means that I had immediate kidney failure. And so I had to go on dialysis, and I'm on dialysis, been on dialysis since 2018. That whole experience changed everything, and it made me take things slower. It made me be more appreciative of relationships that I see, because you can die. And I think that it made me tell my children about, one of the things that I heard, and it's fun, I heard it before, it was, and I told them, I'm going to pass away. And if I do, I don't want you to be afraid. I don't want you to be scared, but I want you to be prepared. I want you to be prepared. So a lot of the times I talk to them about, I think it goes back with the whole idea about the law enforcement, my thoughts on that, and wanting them to get on. But I definitely think since that time, I've been more measured with my words and my experiences, and just enjoyed the time with people. And I think that the energy I'm always receiving from people, like the energy I'm getting from you, is a positive energy. I'm really cognizant of that now, of the energy that people give off, and realize, there's some energies I don't want to be around because I don't really have time for it, literally. But one of the things that I tell people all the time is that my disease made me realize that, and made me appreciate life more, because I realized that time is finite, and that there is a time that's clicking. But we all have a finite time, and that's the crazy part about it. All of us will succumb at one point in time. So all of us should have that same type of mentality of cherishing relationships and definitely providing a positive energy if possible.
Agreed. For me, it was turning 50 that did it. That made it real clear. And I know that of what you speak. And I wish you best health and success. Just loads more. You've already got some, but even more.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. Success for me is all of us getting something. That would be success for me. Is like all of us getting opportunity where we don't have to hear about Black businesses not getting enough capital, all this sort of stuff. That is going to be my dream.
Remember, you can follow us on Instagram at 365 Brothers. Also, follow us on Facebook at 365 Brothers, the podcast. Lastly, I just want to let you know, producing a podcast, it takes something, and I'm really grateful to have partnered with alidu.com. They make publishing easy. There's a link in the show notes for anyone who either has a podcast or is thinking about a podcast. You don't need to learn all that sound balancing and compression. Save all that. Use your time for what matters, interviewing and sharing the stories that your podcast brings. Thank you for listening to 365 Brothers. I certainly hope you enjoyed the episode. I encourage you to subscribe. Please leave a review. I want to know what you think. Also, if you know someone who would be a fantastic guest for 365 Brothers, please direct them to our website, 365brothers.com. You'll also find all the episodes there, 365brothers.com. And your support is welcome. And remember, to listen is to love.